Audi R8. Why am I driving Audi R8? Well, it's a car that has gotten a not insignificant amount of attention among motovloggers, for better or worse. I know Snowcat nearly got hit by one in one of his videos, and I think Do It With Dan was either driving one or checking one out pretty closely, so I figured, hey, maybe I should do a video about what it's actually like to drive and own and live with one of these things. So, I should probably start off by saying this is not a car that I liked very much to begin with. When it first came out, I thought the styling was a little bit strange, and I've never been a huge fan of Audis. I mean, there's some Audis I like the UR Quattro and, the old rally car, stuff like that. I really appreciate those things for various reasons, but the modern cars, not really my brand of vodka. That being said, a lot of the prejudices I had against the R8 were due to the fact that I drove a very early car. I drove I think it was a 2008 with the R-tronic fluffy pedals, which are horrible. It is the most horrible transmission in the history of transmissions. And a lot of flappy pedal transmissions, if you've seen a bunch of my videos, I'm not a fan of them. I don't like Lamborghinis, I don't like Ferraris until very recently, and even then I still don't like them compared to an actual proper manual gearbox. But anyway, the R8 I drove had the R-tronic flappies, and it was a nightmare. If you're on a racetrack, if you're beating the absolute balls off the car, it's not that bad, but if you're, just driving around in town, they're terrible. They're lurchy, they burn the clutch up in like 5,000 miles, and it's almost a $4,000 clutch. So I just didn't like the car. It didn't feel fast with the R-tronic. The early cars had a really, really restrictive exhaust, so the car was really quiet. I mean, obviously you can hear this one isn't. This is a much later car, and they really went to great lengths to make it sound the way it should. So, yeah, with a manual, in a later production car, this is still a V8, this is one of the last V8s made, it's a really nice, daily drivable, exotic car, I gotta say. I mean, there are still some things I don't like about it, like, I don't like these stupid rotary controls for the stereo, and I don't like the control weighting. I mean, the steering is quite nice, it's a bit light. Well, it's weird. It's gives you a reasonable amount of feedback, but it alternates between being light and heavy due to the Quattro system. At times, you really wouldn't expect it to be so. So if you're just piddling around like this, it's quite light. But if you're on it and it's actually sending power to the front, it gets very heavy, and I find that just kind of meh. But the steering I can live with. What I can't really live with much is the weight of the pedals. The brakes, the clutch, the gas are like driving a cloud. I mean, if you've ever driven even like an A3 or an A4 with a manual, there's absolutely no resistance on the controls. So you usually end up, doing unnice things to the clutch initially until you get used to it, and if you have to get on the brakes really hard, you're going to put yourself through the windshield, that kind of stuff. So I wish it had more weightiness to the controls. And one thing I will say is the transmission is quite nice. I mean, the gated shifter here is it's not like a Ferrari gated shifter. Like a Ferrari gated shifter, it has the gate, obviously, but the actual linkage to the transmission is a hard shaft with U-joints in it, and they can get away with that because the center console here is quite a lot lower to the floor of the car. Whereas this uses cables, like most mid-engine cars do these days, and virtually all front-wheel drive cars do. And so it's got a little bit of vagueness to the linkage, even though the gate helps that quite a lot. But I do like the transmission. I do like the shifter. It's very direct. It's a very fast transmission. You can shift it. Some transmissions you got to be gentle when it's cold. This one you really don't. I mean, one thing about the R8, for better or worse, it is very Germanic, by which I mean everything is built properly. You know, nothing just comes off. Nothing randomly catches on fire. Nothing comes with a notation in the owner's manual saying don't do this when this happens. This car, you can just get in it and drive it like a Camry. I mean, a very loud, fast Camry with a manual anyway. So it's an exclusive car, but it's drivable, and it does kind of fly below the radar. If you were to get one of these in a dark color, it's not that remarkable to draw attention. So if you want to go fast with a daily driver exotic, without attracting a whole lot of attention, this is a really good way of doing it. And frankly, it's a hell of a lot more fun than a Mercedes or, you know, one of the non-exotic but fast BMWs, like not an M car, but like a big engined 5 Series or something. So yeah, it is a car you can use every day, and you know, you're not going to grind bits off of it. You know, it's not going to cost you $1 zillion to run, and really the only expensive maintenance item is the clutch. But if you know how to drive, you'll get, you know, 50, 60, 70,000 miles out of the clutch, unless you're doing burnouts every day or launching the car. Again, because it is all-wheel drive. If you're going to beat something up launching this car, it's going to be the clutch. Other than that, it's just a very usable, nice car. And, you know, it has grown on me pretty substantially since, you know, the early days when I really did not like them. And that was almost 10 years ago, and they really have done a lot. You know, big thing is they fixed the exhaust, so it actually sounds, you know, like an exotic car should now. Very nice. Now, as I mentioned before, this is the V8, the 4.2 V8, which is actually the one I prefer. I know they have, you know, the Gallardo, the Lambo Gallardo V10 in them now, and they've also got like the V10 Plus in the very new ones, which are kind of like, okay guys, all you idiots who are spending $200,000 to have this engine in a car, here's the amount of power it can actually make, which is around 600. And all you guys who bought this engine making 500 horsepower or so are just idiots. Sorry. So there's that. Plus, I just think the V8 suits the car. And yeah, it is a lot slower than like the V10 Plus, which has almost 600 horsepower, but I don't know, it's more torquey, it's more direct, it's more immediate, it's very, very revvy. And I mean, the Lambo V10 is a really good engine, but this V8, it's just got a certain character that the V10 doesn't. And I'm slightly jaded because I've worked on a zillion Gallardos, and I've put turbo kits on those engines, and I've built supercharger systems for the V10, and I know that engine very well. I also know this engine very well, and I just like this one more. It's more playful. You know, it's got a retarded red line. It's like 8,300, and if you put a tune on it, it goes up to 8,500, and you get some more power out of it. I just like the engine. It suits the car. Now, if this were my car and I was going to keep it and daily drive it, I would want some more power out of it. But, you know, you can fix that for not a lot of money. I mean, you can throw a supercharger kit on these things for, you know, 20, 30 grand, which, yeah, is a lot of money, but it's a supercar. It's a $100,000 car, used. Well, I mean, you can get an early one for maybe 70 or 80 right now, but it's probably going to be a floppy pedal car, and you don't want that. Or you can throw a turbo system on it for some money, you know, probably 30, 40,000 to have someone like me do that for you. But then you've got a really ridiculously fast car that doesn't cost anywhere near as much as a new, you know, V10 Plus, and even much less still than something like a Gallardo. So, yeah, and another thing I don't like is the four-wheel drive. You know, that's one thing that really pisses me off with Audi. There's a time and a place for four-wheel drive. If you're making a family sedan or something, that you drive in the snow belt, yeah, that's a good reason to have all-wheel drive in a car. If you are, you know, making a rally car, yeah, it needs to have four-wheel drive to be competitive. That's just the nature of it, and that's fine. But in a supercar, you don't need it, and it doesn't really add anything unless you're a complete idiot and can't drive for shit. So, you know, that's my biggest thing against Audi, is that they've ruined a lot of supercars like Lamborghini, which they own, with four-wheel drive. Like the one Gallardo that they snuck out the back door, the Balboni edition, which was a manual transmission and a rear-wheel drive configuration, they took the front drive shafts out of it, was the best Gallardo ever made to drive by a very wide margin. It just completely changes the character of the car. And this thing, with like an extra 100 horsepower and yeah, but that being said, it's not slow, it's quick, it's just not as fast as it could be. But anyway, this car with an extra 100 horsepower and rear-wheel drive would be just about perfect. It would actually, I would rather have one of these in that configuration than a 911 Turbo. And that's due in part to the fact that Porsche has ruined the 911 Turbo with four-wheel drive and fluffy paddles. But it would just be an incredibly desirable car for me to own myself and to drive every day in that configuration. Now, you can do that to the car. You can rip out the Quattro system. You can rip out the front drive shafts and do a software flash and some various fumbuckery to, you know, let the car work without four-wheel drive. And that's what I'd do if I were to buy one myself. That would just make it an ideal platform, because it is quite light. It's only about 35-ish hundred pounds, which, you know, isn't like Lotus light, but by today's standards, that's fairly light. That's what a good sports car weight was 20 years ago. So that's what I do to make this car perfect for me. But if you're just someone who wants just a car that's unique and by most people's standards very fast, I mean, again, I'm jaded. I drive really retardedly fast cars. You know, my idea of an appropriate level of horsepower for a street car is 700 to 800. And most people are just not experienced with that level of power. Most people will not use that level of power. Hell, I rarely use that level of power. I just really like having it, because sometimes, you know, at 3 in the morning in Mexico, I will go do a highway pull, and it's nice to be able to get to like 160 plus in like 15 seconds. That's cool. And just having the power, you know, even if you don't use it all, just having the huge surplus of power. So if you want to get around, like for example, these idiots who I'm stuck behind, if this was not a twisty road, if this was just like a 2-lane road and I wanted to get around these assholes, if I had a boatload of power, I could do it in like 2 seconds and I'd be ahead of them, and it would be all over. Whereas in this car, or, you know, a car with like 3-ish hundred horsepower, I wouldn't try this even on a straight road that I could see around the corners, because it would just take too long. And if someone came around a corner, I'd just be caught out in a really bad place, so it's not worth the risk. But for most people, to get back to my point and stop rambling, it's a completely adequate amount of power. And like I say, if you shop around, you can get a V8, one of these, used, you know, in the 70s for a nice one with a manual, maybe 80. And yeah, that's a lot of money for a lot of people. If you're 22 years old and you just got out of college, that's all the money in the world, and it's unapproachable for most people of that age. But if you're 32 years old and you've been busting your ass for 10 years, having just got out of college or done a trade or whatever, it's a reasonable amount of money, certainly, to finance. If you're like, okay, I'm just going to put in an extra 10 hours a week in overtime, and hey, that's an extra, you know, $20,000 a year for most people. You know, if you're financing this car over 5 years, 20 grand a year, we'll buy you one, a nice used one. And yeah, then you've got a supercar you can use every day. And yeah, there are running costs. I mean, the insurance is more than it will be on like a pickup truck or a Camry, but it's also not ruinous, again, because of the replacement value and the fact that, it's not like a car where there's 200 of them in the world. I mean, there are some out there. I think the total production number on R8s is around 20 some odd thousand cars. So you can find one if you need to, if you've been it. But so yeah, it's probably the most cost-effective, most usable, best value supercar you can buy. And the average person, you don't care if you're a plumber or a welder, or you're someone who went to college and you're making more money than a plumber or welder will. It's anyone who decides, I need this in my life, so I'm going to bust my butt to achieve it. They can achieve it. You can buy one of these. And that gives it a certain amount of character. It's kind of like a European Corvette, and I know some Audi people will get really upset with me for saying that, and probably some Corvette people too, but that's just what it is. It's just an approachable, exotic car that has really good performance and really striking looks, and I would have this before a Corvette. Now, I like Corvettes. I like all American muscle cars and supercars. I prefer stuff like the Shelby Mustangs and the Dodge Viper to Corvettes, but I still like Corvettes quite a lot. Especially like the crazy ones like the ZR1 and so forth. They're just good cars, but this has a much nicer interior. It has much nicer control inputs. It has much nicer electronics, even though the A8 electronics in this thing are not massively awesome, but they do the job, and they do the job better than that stupid thing that Chevy puts in the Corvette. And you get parking sensors and radar shit to keep you from crashing into stuff in the parking lot, and the AC works perfectly and nothing breaks. I mean, it's German. I mean, they know how to screw a car together. So, it's quick. And it's a good car. Again, in summary, I guess the biggest thing for me in the R8 is it's a surprising car. I kind of gave it, a little bit of crap when it first came out, and again, this is because I drove an early one, which I just didn't like very much. It didn't have the immediacy, the transmission was horrible with the flappy paddles, and I thought it looked a little goofy. Whereas a couple years, further in the development of the car, it really is pretty good. So there you have it. A little taste of the Audi R8. Everything I like about it and everything I don't. And if you're looking for one, get one with the real gearbox. If you can afford the V10, yeah, I'd probably say go for it, but especially if it's your only car. But don't think the V8 is not a benefit, or that it doesn't suit the car. It really does. In fact, like I said before, I would say the V8 suits the car better than the V10. I know it sounds strange, but it does. Hey, you like my videos? Well, subscribe to the channel then. Hit the like button. And if you want to comment, tell me what kind of an idiot I am, go over to leonloco.com and let me know. Yeah.